Hello, everyone that is joining us. Thank you for coming to our session today. We are going to touch a little bit about design teams. I do want to mention we are recording this session. It should only be recording people that are talking, so the three of us that have our screens on currently. However, just in case, if you would like to change your name to be just an initial or just a first name or anything like that, please feel free to do so. There's a couple ways you can do it. If you are kind of hovering over your little square tile, you can click on the three dots and rename yourself there, or you can open the participants tab and you can click on the more button next to your name and rename yourself there as well. So if you'd like to rename yourself so that just in case your full name doesn't get recorded, you're welcome to do so. All right, so welcome to our session. My name is Erin. I'm the Student Recruitment Officer for UBC Engineering, so thank you for joining us. I do want to mention that I work on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people, or where the Vancouver campus is located. And I also have two students with me that are both part of design teams, and that's really what our session is going to be about. We have lots of design teams at UBC. We have over 30 design teams with new ones popping up every year. They do some really exciting things. Many of them compete internationally, and a lot of the teams I talk to tend to do very, very well in all those competitions that they go to. Even though last year or this past year has been online primarily, we've still had lots of our teams go to competitions. And again, they've done very, very well. So two of the people that I have with me today are from design teams who have recently done very well in the competitions that they were at. And if you saw the email that I sent out on the weekend, then you would have already gotten a chance to read a little bit about them. Or about their teams at least. I will get them to introduce themselves. So Megan, if you'd like to go first.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan. I'm in my third, going into my fourth year, chemical and biological engineering here at UBC. I'm co-captain of the engineering design team, ChemEcar. It's a chemical engineering-based design team, and I use the pronouns she and her.
Excellent. And Taylor, I'll have you go next.
Hi, so I'm Taylor. I'm going into my third year of geological engineering, and this was my first year on the geological subdivision of third quadrant design. And just a bit about me, I graduated from Thailand, and so came to UBC because it was super international. It was like a great transition, and yeah.
Excellent. So thank you, both of you, for joining us, and welcome to our session today. So I do want to let everyone know that, we are talking about these two design teams, Third Quadrant Design and ChemEcar today. All of the design teams that we have are going to be a little bit different. So it's just important to kind of know that while we might mention some specifics about these teams, every team is a little bit different. We have teams that focus on aerospace, on robotics, on sustainability, on biomedical projects, on so many different topics that you can imagine. And so there are tons of teams out there. The kind of recruitment process for each of those teams will be a little bit different. So if we do mention any specifics, just know that they might be a little bit different for each team. So the other thing that I want to mention is that for all of you here with us today, you are welcome to use the chat to ask your questions. You are all currently muted and you will remain muted just for recording purposes. However, you can use the chat and you can type into the chat any of your questions. I will ask that you send your questions to everyone and so not to a specific person for a couple of reasons. So if you are sending a question that someone has already asked, you can kind of have a quick look and see if someone's already asked that question. That will just help us with managing those questions. And then just to make sure that I can help moderate them. If you're sending one to a specific person, it just gets a little bit harder to try and moderate those questions. So when you see the to button, just make sure it's going to everyone, and that will be the best place to ask your questions. All right, I have some questions kind of prepared to get us started, but if you have questions already, feel free to add them into the chat and we'll be answering them throughout the session today. So Taylor, can you start off by sharing a little bit about what is third quadrant design? You mentioned you're part of the geological engineering team as part of third quadrant design. What does that mean? And how did you kind of get involved with the team?
Yeah, so third quadrant design is a multidisciplinary team. And so what that means is you can have people who are coming from like mechanical engineering, people who are involved in like electrical engineering, and I just happen to be a part of the civil and geological committee. And so each of these different subcommittees kind of works on different aspects of the project. And so what third quadrant does is each year we compete in the US Solar Decathlon's Build and Design Challenge. And so what that kind of is the US Department of Solar Energy has a competition every year. And so different school teams will try and build different innovative and sustainable like designs. And then you kind of compete and see which one is like the most sustainable and which one kind of like addresses like the needs of the community. And so how I got involved in this design team is at the start of my second year, I really wanted to gain like more technical skills. And so there's definitely a lot of different design teams. And so I kind of went through them and saw like which ones kind of matched my interests, which ones kind of like aligned up with like my degree. And so I applied to a couple. And of course, I was a bit nervous at first because I was a bit scared, like, oh, if I'm qualified or not, which I think definitely just go ahead and apply. And so I got into third quadrant design and have definitely learned a lot since. I'm like super happy with the people I've met and like the skills I've gained.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Megan, I'll kind of have you share a little bit about the same of what is ChemEcar, what does it do, and how did you get involved?
Yeah, for sure. So ChemEcar is primarily a chemical engineering design team, but as with third quadrant design, it is multidisciplinary. We have members from a bunch of different departments at UBC and even in engineering. So it's a really great way to get involved and to improve your technical skills. ChemEcar, what we do is we build a shoebox size car and we compete at the AICHE ChemEcar competition. AICHE stands for the American Institute of Chemical Engineers, and they are a big organization based in the US, but they have members from all over the world. And universities can sign up to participate in the ChemEcar competition. That's what we are named from. And they can be a part of a bunch of different regions and compete. So we are part of the Pacific Northwest region. So we compete against the University of Calgary and a bunch of other universities in the Northwest hemisphere of the United States. So we compete at the regional competition every year in April, and then based on our placement, we will move forward to the national ChemEcar competition, which takes place every single year in November. The goal of the shoebox size car is essentially just to have the car move or travel a certain distance, but you are not allowed to communicate with the car, essentially tell it when to start and stop. And we can't power it. We can't power it using anything but our homemade batteries that we make in our lab. So it's a really fun design. I personally got involved with it in my first year. At the time when I joined UBC, did not know what design team was. It was just something I had heard once I got here. I thought it would be a really great way to kind of get more on the technical side. I was in high school, I was heavily involved in sports. So I just essentially looked at a bunch of different design teams. I was mainly interested in chemical engineering. So I guess stereotypically went to ChemEcar and I applied, I got on and have been here since. So I think as Taylor kind of touched on, design teams are a really good experience to get hands-on skills, build your technical skills, and it's a really great way to fun and meet other members and students at UBC.
Awesome, thank you. There is a question in the chat about what time generally do student design teams accept applications? So that's a great question. We kind of talked about how you both got onto the team. A lot of teams will accept applications usually starting in early fall or kind of towards the end of the summer. Even they'll start kind of some of that advertising of recruitment for their teams. There's teams that have lots of different ways of doing so. So they'll promote themselves through Facebook. And so if you're in the first year Facebook group, that's definitely a great way to see those pieces. If there's a specific team that you're interested in, I would definitely follow them on social media or look at their websites. But Megan, maybe do you want to touch on a little bit about how your team is planning any sort of recruitment or kind of what your team normally requires of students?
Yeah, of course. So as I kind of mentioned, I'm co-captain of the design team. This coming year will be my third year co-captain of the design team. So typically what we've done is a week or two before classes, we will post on our social media and our website mentioning that we are looking to hire or receive applications for potential new members. One great way to, if you're not sure, there's so many teams, there's 30 as Erin was saying, there's a location on the AppSci website that lists all of the design teams, and it has links to their websites, their social media. So if you want to get a head start and start checking that out, highly recommend going and using that resource. Another way, at least how I discovered ChemEcar, was on Main Mall during Imagining. Now that's still to be determined whether that's in person or it's going to be virtual again this year. But whether it's virtual or in person, there's going to be a bunch of booths with all the engineering designs, and that's honestly our main way of reaching out to first year students or other students at UBC to advertise and talk about our team and that we're going to be recruiting. So that normally recruiting starts a couple last weeks of August. It'll go to mid-September. That's, at least for my team, I'd say that's generally the case for most design teams, but I would highly recommend, if you're interested in one specific design team, to look ahead and see when their application process is, because it could be different and you don't want that opportunity.
Awesome, thanks. I did add in a link to the chat. So if you scroll through, I know there's a lot of questions coming in, but the teams has a listing of all of the different design teams. It's kind of organized by topic. So it's a really easy way to kind of look through what those teams are. And they'll all link to either a website or social media site for each of those teams to kind of learn a little bit more about what they have going on. A few more questions coming in kind of about that sort of application process, about kind of, so the criteria used to admit will be different for each team. And sometimes they will be looking for specific skill sets that you might have. Sometimes they're just looking for general passion about their projects that they're working on. First year students do often get onto design teams. You might not have a senior role or anything like that. A lot of the teams have kind of sub teams as part of them. And so you might not be a leader of any of those areas just yet, but as a first year student or as a new student to UBC, it's a great way to kind of get immersed and see what's going on. And if things are you know, if really interesting to you and you're doing well, then maybe you will actually contribute even more than you thought. There's one story I always like to share from the Baja team. So they basically design off-road vehicles that have to like climb up mountains and do all these different routes over like giant boulders and through sand and all this sort of thing. And so one of their main components a couple of years ago was actually designed by a first year student on their team. They just had this real passion for it and they were really interested, and they used input from the rest of the team, and they actually created a component for their vehicle that was designed by a first year student. So first year students can definitely get involved and be significant parts of the team, but it's also up to you to kind of like get that exploring in. In that long-winded kind of explanation, Taylor, I'm going to jump to you and kind of ask a question about what were the steps that you needed to go through to get onto your team last year when you were applying?
So for our application, it was just mainly like a survey where they asked like a couple questions. And of course they ask you things like, okay, how does your past experience, like how will that be helpful? But I feel like a lot of it was just a gauge for trying to see like why you're passionate about joining, because there are so many different design teams and you really could be interested in so many different things, but a lot of them are looking for like, why are you specifically interested in joining this, or how you think you can contribute. And I don't think that means you have to have, like, at least in our case, like built a house before. No, it can just be that you're like interested in like sustainable practices. And that honestly can be like enough to like get your like foot in the door, I think.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I think that also helps answer, we had a few questions coming in about how competitive are they to join? Do you need prior technical experience coming in to be able to join them? So I think the answer is no, but it also depends on the teams and what positions are available and things like that. So definitely checking out those options. I know some teams will have like a mentorship program where you kind of start out in a mentorship program and you're not really on a specific project just yet. You get to kind of learn a little bit. Some you dive right in, and like I said, you're like already designing stuff for a competition or things like that. So there's so many different options, really just depending on what your interest is. The one thing I will mention for, anyone coming into first year especially is that, the engineering course load is a lot and there's lots of things to get involved in. So from an advising perspective, we definitely recommend that you don't just dive headfirst into everything. But that first kind of couple weeks of school is a great time where you can go to, like Megan mentioned, there's kind of the main event. I think it might be online this year still, but again, they haven't fully released all the details yet, but basically all of the teams will be there. All of the other clubs across campus will be there as well. So it's a time for you to see everything available to you. A lot of them will have like signups where you put your email down, you get sent extra information and things like that. Or a lot of the teams will host various info sessions. So you can still, sign up for a few things there to get all of that info and then kind of decide where you're going to put your effort. But we do kind of recommend limiting yourself to kind of like two main commitments outside of school in first year. So that still gives you enough time to be able to make sure that you're, maintaining your studies and doing well and things like that. But you can get involved in kind of a couple of extra things. And then as you progress through your degree, you'll definitely get a lot better at that time management piece and understanding kind of what works for you and what doesn't work for you. So I will kind of preface it with that. But you do have the option in those first kind of couple weeks of school to really learn lots about all sorts of different teams and clubs and things like that. There's a question about which design teams generally hire students from coding background, do projects involving machine learning and data science. I am not an expert in any of our teams, but I will say probably the robotics teams are a good one to check out, or the computer teams. But again, even lots of the teams kind of have all of these different components as part of it. So even Taylor, maybe you can talk a little bit about this if you have those details, but Third Quadrant Design is not currently actually building anything physical, but you're doing a lot of that design in different types of like CAD software and things like that. So maybe you can kind of mention some of those skill sets, which are things that students are able to, some might be learning in the classroom and applying those skills, but other students are probably, I'm assuming, just kind of learning those areas because they're interested in it. Can you talk about any of those sorts of like, kind of like software background or the programs that you use and things like that?
Right. So for us, at least, we were using like programs called like Revit and CAD. And so in your first year, you'll definitely like touch on some of these like programs. But a lot of the time, it was also, we were learning a lot of stuff like because of the design team. And so a lot of the time they will like teach you, like you don't, like I said before, you kind of don't need to have technical experience going in, because they do have workshops, and sometimes they'd have like industry kind of partners come in and show people like how you do stuff. And just like for software, like, yeah, like even though our team's definitely more geared towards like, I guess, civil engineering technically, we still had like an electrical team that was working on like those components of it, where they were looking at different like software models and how to like design stuff. Like, although you're not technically building a house, you're basically going through all the steps as if you were to. And so you are gaining a lot of those skills as if you were actually doing it. Oh, Erin, I think you're muted.
Yeah, you're muted, Erin.
Sorry, thank you. I'm going to throw these next two questions towards Megan. So there's a question about, is design team funding and sponsorship responsibility of the team members, and how does UBC help teams receive the funding that they need? So maybe you can speak a little bit more about how that works, Megan.
Yeah, for sure. So unfortunately, money doesn't grow on trees. So we do have to apply for funding and have some sort of source of money to work on these projects. UBC and the Engineering Undergraduate Society, the EUS, you'll learn a lot more about that throughout your journey here at UBC and as you join the UBC engineering program. But they essentially have a lot of different funds that design teams can apply to get that funding to work on the teams. They have a professional activities fund, they have a student design team competition fund, so you can apply to those. And then based on how much money they have that year, they'll distribute it accordingly to the teams. And then in addition to that, a lot of teams do is they get sponsorship. So that can be from a company, that can be from an organization. I know my team has a sponsorship from an organization called the Dan Family Fund. So that money also goes to the teams. I won't go into too much more detail about that as to how the money is stored and like how that all works, but there are ways for design teams to get that funding. That's not, at least for myself and our teams, I wouldn't expect my members to apply for that. That would mainly be my role or the team lead's role to take that on. But obviously, if that's something you're interested in and you want to support that, expressing interest to the design team you're on or to the captain or whoever you are in your application process, you can always bring up, hey, I'm really interested, or hey, I've done this before. Do you need any support or kind of help? And I personally would not say no to someone who's really eager to get that learning experience. So that's specifically more about the funding.
Awesome. But it's definitely not the individual member's responsibility to bring funding to the team. And that's kind of more of a team-wide piece. So you don't need to worry about doing that piece.
Yeah. I should also add that any money that I would not, or any other team would not expect you to put any of your own personal money towards the team. Maybe if we're doing merch, if you want a sweater or a t-shirt, that's where that would come in. But whenever we travel for competition, we pay for the accommodation and the flights or the bus. That is not something that we expect our members to do, as this is an extracurricular activity. We're all students. So that's something else I should add if anyone else is worried about that.
Awesome. Yeah. And that really helps make these teams accessible to all of our students. So it's really a cool way for everyone to get involved. And even if there is travel, not everyone on the team is always traveling either. There are certain people that will travel, I mean, depending on the team as well. So there's all of these different pieces, but the teams can definitely share the specifics for their specific team with you. The next question is, I assume most design teams have different schedules. Are there general times of days or days of the week that most design teams will meet? Taylor, maybe you can let us know a little bit more about your experience from your team, or even from other friends that you might have on teams, about kind of if there is a general time when teams will meet, or you can kind of talk a little bit about the weekly time commitment as well.
So for our team, what we would do is, since there was like a big team meeting and then a committee meeting, those would be scheduled at different times. And so typically I noticed that most design teams have their big team meeting at least on the weekends. Ours happened to be on Sundays. And so those were typically from like 11 to like 1. So that was like a 2-hour window where everyone was kind of like catching up, and like team leads would present what their subcommittees had done. And then for our actual subcommittees meetings, those would typically be an hour, and some people had them like later on in like the weekday times, like after classes, but ours happened to be also on the weekdays. So we would just kind of have like a morning for design team stuff, and then everyone kind of knew what they had to do, and like you could get it done during the week.
Excellent. And Megan, I assume that your team is probably a similar structure to that.
Yeah, it's very similar, where we do a lot of our in-person work on the weekends. And recently this year, with everything being online, we had one big team meeting, which was 1 hour during the week, where it was very difficult to find a time because of the time zones, but we were able to do that this year. What we're probably going to do, and I know what a lot of design teams do when they're in person, is they'll have a scheduled work day, most likely Saturday mornings, where people will come in and work on the projects, or as I was mentioning, and they'll have another meeting during the week where they'll meet and talk about all their items, what they might need to work or do on the weekend when they go to work in person, or maybe they need to meet separately in their sub team or their subcommittees and work on some things in more details. So typically you could expect one meeting during the week and then a couple hours on the weekend for some work.
Awesome, thanks. The next question is still kind of related to timelines. Do design teams work year round? So from my experience with most design teams, they do work year round. Actually, the summer is when a lot of the competitions happen, because that tends to be when students are most available to travel and things like that. Anything that either of you wanted to add to that piece?
I guess I can quickly add to that. Yes, and depending on the timeline of when the competition is, that'll really determine when people are recruiting, or what the project is like. I know some competitions even happen in December, and that's their regionals or their first competition of the year. So they won't do recruitment in September. They'll do recruitment in January. But once again, those are very specific teams. You want to keep an eye out for that. But for other teams, it's typically you'll work during the school year. You'll have your competition at the beginning of the summer. And then my team normally takes a break, but because this year we're going to nationals, which is taking place in November, we are working throughout the summer just because if we start in September, that's cutting it a little close. So depending on what kind of work you want to do and then you can always ask that during the interview as well. If you're wanting the summer off and you're wanting just to do this during the school year, that's something you can ask as well. I see another question in the chat is asking if design teams operate in co-op terms. Yes, I actually was on co-op last year. Since I've actually been on co-op since May, and I'll be going back to school in September. I've taken the entire year off. Because of co-op, it's really complicated. Anyone can take co-op when they want after they've applied and gotten into the program. It's very specific to your year and to your timetable and what courses you need to take, and it also depends on your program. So it'd be very hard to accommodate all your second, third, or fourth year students who are on co-op at different times. So if that's something else you can decide, if you don't want to be on the design team during co-op, keep that in mind. Or I personally found that I had a lot more free time because I didn't have homework or had to study in the evening. So this was something really fun to do. I know I'm complaining about not having anything to do in my evening for the past year. No, but it was something really fun that I can do and fill up my time. So just keep in mind what's best for you and go from there and ask about when the work time is during the year and all that kind of stuff.
Awesome, thanks. And also co-op doesn't start until, you don't apply into co-op until your second year at the earliest. Most co-op work terms don't start until the summer after second year. So if you are getting involved in design teams, that already gives you some chance. You'll probably have a good sense of like what the workload is like and whether you potentially need to take a break from the team while you're on co-op or if you can get involved. We do have students do work terms outside of Vancouver. So if the work is in person, that might kind of be some part of your decision-making components as well. But co-op terms might be as short as 4 months too. So sometimes 4 months away is not as big of a deal as taking a full year away and things like that. So there's so many kind of different pieces that go into making those decisions. And good news is you have a lot of time before you need to make those decisions, and that gives you some chance to kind of explore a little bit more. But if it is something that you're concerned about, definitely, like Megan said, talk to the teams that you're interested in to see kind of what that might look like for you. There is a question, what are the chances that a first year student can actually form a new design team? So it's definitely possible. Part of it comes into play of what your design team is, what you're looking to do. Some of those pieces kind of also come into the funding and will your design team have money to do that and things like that. So there are many design teams that have kind of different sub teams. So in the example of like third quadrant design, my understanding, at least Taylor, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that all the sub teams are still kind of working towards the same big project. That's correct, yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas you have other teams, so another team that I'll mention is the biomedical engineering student team. They typically don't compete as much as some of the other teams, but they will have multiple projects on the go. So they usually have somewhere between like 5 to 10 projects on the go every year of working towards different kind of big ideas, and they'll have those different teams, and then they'll even have sub teams within those sub teams of kind of working towards different projects of one thing that they worked on in the past was for femur fractures treatment. Basically, they've done things where trying to isolate components from cinnamon to treat diabetes. So there's all these different things that they'll work on as well that are very different from each other. So if that project can be part of a design team that already exists, that might be your first kind of action piece to see if that project falls into a different team that already exists and could be a sub project of a different team. But we do have a really great professional development office, and they are kind of the administrators of design teams. And there is a student design team coordinator, which is a student staff that works with that professional development team every year. And so that would be the best place to kind of get started if you haven't already. So if you're not sure who to talk to, definitely send me an email and I can get you connected. But that's kind of where I'll leave that piece, that it might fit into a part of a team that already exists. Or it might kind of be its own standalone team. And like I said, we have new teams that get created every year, so it's definitely possible. The next question I'll answer really quickly as well. Can students from other faculties be a part of design teams? And the answer is yes. Many design teams will have, so I think you listed kind of some science programs. Definitely science students are part of design teams. There will be kinesiology students that are part of design teams. So especially when you're looking at some of the biomedical teams. There's a lot of business students that are also part of design teams, because a big component of design teams is the kind of presentation and selling of your product or your project that you're working on at a lot of the competitions. So there are students from literally any faculty that can be part of design teams. Again, as was mentioned already, it just really depends on what positions are open, what the teams are looking for, to kind of see if you're not part of applied science and you're part of a different faculty, to check in with the team and see what positions are available. There's some questions. Maybe if you've joined us a little bit later, I will mention this is being recorded. We will be posting it on the first year Facebook group page. So if you missed anything, you can join again. Applications for teams will typically open towards the end of August, and applications are usually due sometime in mid-September. You'll see more promotion about that coming up closer to the start of the school year, but definitely check in with those teams if you are interested. Question about, is it possible to join two design teams? Megan, do you want to, I see you nodding. Do you want to answer that one?
Sure. Just as like a caveat, I'm heavily involved in the engineering community and UBC community, so I'm not just the co-captain of ChemEcar. I'm involved in a lot of things. I won't go into detail on that. It is possible for you to join many clubs or even two design teams. My recommendation as first years is, one, just be careful with how much you're taking on. I did 500 clubs in high school. I came to UBC and I was only able to do 2 things in addition to school in my first year. Slowly, I've been able to add on to that because I've learned a lot better on how to manage my time and how to focus on school while focusing on these other extracurriculars. It is definitely possible if you're really eager and you have all those skills pat down, you can do 2 design teams. My only recommendation is just to make sure that the meetings don't overlap. That I think would be the only concern. Obviously, I'm compliant to anyone on my team doing 2 design teams. I've told them that multiple times. It's just to come and talk to us about that, so we're aware of the extra commitments, and then just to make sure that the meetings aren't overlapping, and if we are able to accommodate that. So that would be my only recommendation.
Awesome. And there are other things to get involved in too. So it might not be 2 design teams particularly that you're interested in, but maybe it's a design team and a different club. Maybe you're interested in volunteering or a language club or playing intramurals or anything like that. So there's lots of different things that you can be committed to. And I think just the best thing is just communicating that and making sure that you're setting up your schedule well, and that you're letting anyone know that you're maybe committed in other places as well. There's a few more questions that have come in that we've already answered, so I am going to skip over those. If you are just joining us and asked one of those later questions that we're not answering yet, please check out the recording that will be available. We're basically coming to the end of our session today, so there's one last question that I see that I do want to answer. And that question I do get asked a lot. So does getting into a particular design team help you get into your desired major in second year? Is it independent? Do they have any kind of influence on each other? So from an advising perspective, when you are doing your second year placement process, you are going to give a personal statement to your first choice program about why you are a good fit for that program. So part of that could be being part of a specific design team where you've gotten additional experience in that program, and you've either realized that this is really the path that you want to take, you've realized that you've gotten additional skill set in that field. There could be so many different reasons, depending on what team you're on and what you're doing. If your design team is totally unrelated to the program that you're interested in, I'm going to say chances are you can probably still find some sort of connection, because all of our engineering programs are so interconnected in so many ways, and all of our design teams are going to have different components from each field of engineering. So Taylor mentioned third quadrant is, kind of more of a civil team, but she's in geological engineering. There's electrical sub teams as part of it. So teams that you might not even think are related could still be related. So the answer is really, it could help you. It might not. It's up to you of how you kind of represent that. The programs will not specifically say, oh, they're on a design team that gives them like a point or doesn't give them a point kind of thing or anything like that. It's really how you represent yourself in that personal statement that you're providing to your first choice program. So we do encourage students to get involved in design teams because it is a really great way to get that hands-on experience outside of the classroom. It's a great way to meet other people. It's a great way to meet upper year students as well, which can help you decide on which program maybe you are interested in going into by talking to those upper year students who are in different programs. So there's a lot of benefits for design teams, but it's not necessarily going to make or break which program you get into, because a big portion of second year placement is really based on your first year GPA as well. So there's lots of things to consider for that, but hopefully that gives you kind of a little some pieces to consider for the future of what kind of might work for you. But again, go check out the teams, talk to them, see what the commitment level's like, see what they're looking for, because that can also help you make your decision as well. All right. So before we sign off today, I always like to ask for a piece of advice that you would give yourself if you were in our students' shoes coming into UBC in the fall. So Megan, I'll get you to go first. If you can give if you were back in grade 12, or maybe we might have some transfer students here as well, so maybe transferring into UBC, what sort of advice would you be looking for coming into UBC?
I think advice I'd give to my grade 12 self, I guess making the decision to come to UBC or transitioning to UBC, is to be really open-minded. I know my dad personally has an undergraduate degree in engineering, so he kind of was giving me heads up of the course load and what everything could be considered and other activities to get involved. And he was always telling me to be careful, make sure you don't do too much, don't stress yourself out, take it slow. First year, in my opinion, is one of the hardest years. He was warning me of that as well. And I was like, oh, it's going to be fine. I'm not worried at all. So definitely be open-minded when coming in. I know for myself, I didn't know design teams, as I mentioned, existed. So I looked into it. I was really open-minded, and I was able to join one, and I've had a lot of fun since. And also just get excited to have some fun. I know I've had an absolute blast, at least being on the design, also coming to UBC. So just get ready for some exciting times, and just to be open-minded as you're joining us here at UBC.
Great, thank you so much. And Taylor, I'll get you to give your piece of advice to students coming into UBC.
I think my advice would be very in tune with what you need in the moment, because a lot of the time you can feel a lot of pressure. Like, you see all your friends, maybe they're getting involved in design teams and whatever. Like, I think first year is such a big transition. And so if you feel like you just want to focus on your course load and getting to meet new friends, do that. But if you want to make more friends and try design teams, and you feel like you can also add that on, then also do that. Don't be scared to get involved in things, because that's been where some of my best memories have come from so far. Just on undergraduate teams, on design teams, don't be scared to put yourself out there. And then Also, just know you still have a 4 or maybe 5 year long degree. You don't have to try joining everything in your first year. Definitely, I joined a lot more stuff in my second year when I knew how to manage my time, and I'm actually very happy for that too. Just take things at what you need, and you don't need to compare it with other people. Just do what you need in the moment.
Thank you both so much for joining. Thank you to all of our incoming students that joined the session today. Hopefully that gave you a little bit of an insight to some of our design teams. There are more students in design teams as well on the first year Facebook group as well. So if you do have questions about, general design teams, feel free to post them in the first year Facebook group. And you can also, like I said, check out all of the teams online, go to their websites, go to their social media. You can message with them, and they are usually happy to talk to incoming students. So there's lots of ways to even get connected with them over the summer, to kind of just ask questions, see what projects they're up to and things like that as well. So I really encourage you to continue to look at design teams if that is something that you're interested in. But as mentioned, don't feel pressure that this is something that you have to take advantage of. There are so many options at UBC. We're just here trying to help you explore those a little bit. This session is being recorded. It will be on the first year Facebook group. And again, thank you all so much for joining. Have a great evening. And thank you so much to Taylor and Meghan for spending your evening to help share your experiences so far.